Hi, we're back in the Brussels Signal studio and we're here to talk about anti-Semitism and in particular, anti-Semitism online. I'm happy to be joined by Tal or Cohen Montemayor, who is the founder and chief executive of Cyberwell, which is a non-profit organization and trusted partner of several social media, and they've been tracking and fighting online Semitism. Hi there, Talor.
Hi there. Nice to meet you. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for your time. Okay, let's get straight into it because obviously we have online anti-Semitism, but the latest news is there's been a twist that now the purveyors of anti-Semitism are using AI and it's becoming even more difficult to track. Tell us a bit about that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So online anti-Semitism has been trending and I would say spreading significantly since I started to get involved in this work since even 2015. But now AI has really changed the game in the sense that it's become a tool in the hands of anti-Semites to make their messages and their hatred more convincing and more visual than ever before. And AI generated trends or memes present a particularly significant challenge when it comes to trust and safety enforcement or the enforcement of digital policies. Essentially, despite safeguards that exist on AI tools like Google Veo 3 or OpenAI's ChatGPT, or even song generating AI like Suno, these safeguards can easily be bypassed in order to spread hate, often under the guise of humor, but sometimes even full on stereotypes and biases and tropes against Jews and other minority communities. So we've seen how anti-Semites and we've seen how people who are interested in spreading hate online are now utilizing these tools to make their messages more vibrant, powerful, and convincing than ever before.
And how does that work exactly? Why is it that the AI element makes it more difficult to track?
Well, I think that Cyberwell, from being a trusted partner that works directly with social media platforms and sending in these alerts, we've seen that the social media platforms are actually hesitant to apply their existing digital policies or rules against AI generated content. Some of the memes that Cyberwell has seen recently include the 3,000 years ago trend, which essentially is a trend that's meant to poke fun of or delegitimize the Jewish connection to the land of Israel, but really is used to reinforce and perpetuate harmful stereotypes against Jewish people. When we flagged this to our social media platforms, they said, well, our digital policies are not actually meant to be applied on fictional characters. But that's the whole use of AI by people who are looking to spread hate, is actually to create these fictional characters, as it were, but in practice, they're spreading harmful stereotypes. And I think that we've seen in the legal world how this idea of a real person, what is it, do you have to be a real person in order to be targeted by AI, is no longer the case, right? We see the instances of the use of AI for revenge porn or even copyright infringement by taking away the pictures or the sounds or the faces of actors. And that's really the argument that we've been making to the social media platforms. AI is being used in the hands of haters, in the hands of anti-Semites, in order to target the same minority groups that these digital policies are meant to be protecting. And the social media platforms are really failing to enforce the existing digital policies against these new AI empowered trends and content.
Okay, so I think the key words there that you mentioned were fictional characters. So if my understanding is correct, the laws as exist have been used to clamp down on hatred against real people, but now you're saying this trend, the 3,000 years ago trend, has been using fictional characters, correct?
Fictional characters are what you would call literally a meme, a stand in, a caricature. For example, an Orthodox Jewish person who is visibly Jewish, but is doing things like stealing from you, taking your children, very old anti Semitic, hateful stereotypes. So the question becomes, from a digital policy perspective or from an ethics in AI perspective, which is really a challenge for us today, do we expect the same policies and good governance that we have passed in the digital spaces and in our laws to now apply to AI generated content? Just because a human being didn't create the content themselves or they were helped along by AI does that mean that the policy or the best practice should suddenly cease to exist? Obviously, it's Cyberwell's position that that's not the case and that these digital policies are actually meant to protect minority groups or people of protected characteristics. That includes people of different religions and backgrounds, people with disabilities, or people with different sexual orientation. An AI tool can absolutely be used as a tool to spread more visceral, more convincing, and more visual hate against that same minority protected group. And what we've really seen is that these AI, or the abuse, I should say, of AI tools in the hands of people who are looking to circumvent regular content moderation or trust and safety practices, it's being done on purpose, and it's already exacerbating a failing system of relying on users to actually enforce the rules of the platforms themselves.
Right. I guess a fictional character wouldn't necessarily need to be created by AI. I mean, you can draw a fictional character, right?
Sure. So when you're using an AI tool, you would maybe, they're saying that legally it's considered a fictional character because there's no real human being involved in the process. But AI really bends our concept of how much does the person's body, how much does their voice, how much does their face even really have to be real in the sense of taking a real picture in order for it to be targeting an individual or a group. Right. So in the case of, for example, using actors without their consent, for example, Scarlett Johansson or Angelina Jolie, if their likeness was used in an AI generated image, would that be considered something that was taken away from their IP? So legally, currently, that's a gray area. But on the opposite side of things, what we're really looking for here is an acknowledgement of the fact that calling these stereotypes or tropes or caricatures that are meant to spread hate of any minority group with an AI tool is simply meant to target that group. The fact that it was generated by AI is irrelevant.
Right, and I guess so. Where do cartoons fall in? Because obviously, I've been looking at some of the material you have on your website, which we're going to show with your permission. I mean, there are cartoon-like characters,
Sure.
stereotypes of Jews, which I guess are not new. These stereotypes have been used before. But is your argument that even these cartoons should fall within the scope of the legislation and therefore be taken down?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the use of cartoons specifically for spreading anti Semitism during the Third Reich and before the rise of the Nazis, spreading cartoon caricature depictions of Jews in order to stoke fear, hatred, and disgust of Jewish people was common practice in Nazi news syndicates like Der Stürmer and other places throughout Europe. So the information of the way that cartoons were abused in order to spread hate actually informed a lot of content policy decisions and the way that we even think about legislation today within Europe against Holocaust denial and spreading anti Semitism. So, too, when it comes to AI, nothing has changed in that sense. We humans are still abusing the visual art form in order to spread harm and hateful stereotypes against these groups, including against the Jewish people. Now, the better argument to make here is if these social media platforms are all invested in AI, which they absolutely are, shouldn't these tools be being utilized by the same big tech and social media platforms to actually better enforce their own existing rules, right? The position that, oh, we only rely on user reports when in fact AI presents an opportunity to have much better enforcement of existing digital policies is something that we really need to consider here. Obviously within the bounds of free speech, but the digital policies as we know them today have been developed significantly over the last 10 years by social media platforms to really understand what are the borders of what they feel comfortable with in terms of free speech or humor. The other thing that we have to point out here is that increasingly for social media platforms, especially in a European context, they have the Digital Services Act over their head, right? The the legislation that creates fines for these social media platforms if they fail to remove illegal forms of hate speech under EU law. In that case, a better use of AI would actually be to train this AI to recognize effectively content, cartoons, and even AI generated content that violates these specific policies. So the way that Cyberwell operates is by sending in data, sending in alerts, and really making this data and new information readily available to the platforms as these trends unfold.
So, okay, if I've got that straight, you mean that until now, social media has relied on organizations such as yours, which we can call trusted flaggers. Is that fair?
Trusted partner or trusted flagger, sure.
Right. Okay. They've relied on people like you to alert them to illegal content. But what you want is some kind of AI tool that does it automatically. Is that what you're saying?
I think that the AI technology that exists today actually presents that opportunity. We have seen with social media platforms that have relied primarily, I would say, on the users of the social media platforms to report in offensive and hateful content to them, that the social media platforms also rely on trusted partners like Cyberwell to give them a deeper look into the fringes and the hatred that's being spread online. But when there's an incentive inside of the law, the social media platforms are actually very effective in removing content that violates their policy and has a high risk of creating some kind of legal responsibility. So, just for example, in the case of copyright infringement, if you were to upload a piece of content that featured a song from Queen, for example, it would be removed within a matter of a couple of minutes because they have trained their technology to be so effective in recognizing copyright violation. A second example is the same way that they deal with child pornography. Excellent technology today that's meant to recognize that and take that content down very quickly. Well, if these policies exist also about hateful conduct, then we need to look at the ability to use generative AI to actually create solutions for effectively enforcing these digital policies at scale.
Okay, I get it. Now, what about the fine line between hatred and humor? Because let's face it, this is not easy. Let's take it out of the Jewish context for the moment, and
Sure.
let's suppose I draw a cartoon of a stereotypical Frenchman, and he's got a beret on his head and a string of onions around his neck, and he's riding on a bike. Right now,
Okay.
I'm a cartoonist and I want to portray a stereotypical Frenchman. Right now, some people might object to that stereotype, but you could argue this is free speech or art or even humor. And so therefore the AI tool or whomever would have to assess whether this stereotype is being used to trigger hatred or not, right? And that's not an easy decision to make.
Sure, it's a complex decision, and you definitely have to engage with really looking at where these lines are. And certainly, humor in and of itself, it's not something that anybody is interested in policing, but there are additional symbols and signals here that you could look at to say, where is this group being stereotypically, historically, or systematically targeted? Okay, so unlike the nice description that you said about a stereotype of a French person, which, by the way, is also a nationality that is protected under the digital policies of the social media platforms. Meaning, if you were online spreading hate against Frenchmen and using this additional visual tool to make your point, that could very well be considered prohibited content. And the other thing that's very important to remember about the issue of freedom of speech, and I'm speaking to you as an American who really values freedom of speech, is freedom of speech may be an inherent right that's afforded to you by the government, but there's no law that says that an internet company, an app, or a social media platform affords you the right of free speech. Number one. Number two, we have to look at the mechanisms in which this content is being spread. So this is not just like going out with a poster of the Frenchman in the middle of the street and having however many people walk by you and see that. We're talking about powerful algorithms that can take hate content or to accounts with millions of followers, like the account of Mohammed Hadid, who spread this hateful trend of 3,000 years ago that even poked fun at the Holocaust on his Instagram page with over 1.5 million followers. So, really, when we're looking at the issue of the way that we want to think about content, we need to examine the fact that the mechanisms in which this content is being shared are powerful algorithms. That's a
Right,
really
sure.
important thing to keep in mind.
Sure.
But
Right.
secondly,
Okay.
yes, you're right. Is it difficult to make these decisions? Absolutely. But should we be utilizing as many resources as possible to understand those boundaries? Yes.
Okay. So what you're saying is it's not just the image, it's the intent behind the image,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, and you need
Okay.
to be able to figure that out with additional symbols, right? Actually, a cartoon maybe isn't a good example because it doesn't really express what AI is capable of doing today, which is giving you music, which is giving you additional dialogue and additional content. All of the content that Cyberwell flagged through the 3,000 years ago trend had things up to and including having a Jewish person slapped across the face and then saying, this was promised to me 3,000 years ago. So this is a real example of how that content can actually go into very violent symbols.
Understood. Because obviously, I want to probe the grey area. I mean, the image on your website, for example, of the stereotypical Jew. I mean, the example you've just mentioned seems fairly straightforward to me, but there might be others. Like, for example, the image on your website of the stereotypical Jew, which we will show, is would your goal be that this image would be taken down automatically?
I think that there is a lot of evidence from what Cyberwell has monitored of the use and the abuse of this image that you could automatically flag this image and prevent it from being shared in the powerful engagement algorithms. The issue of we tend to think about this issue of enforcement of digital policies as if the only thing that's in our toolbox is removal. That's not exactly the case. Obviously, Cyberwell advocates for the removal of content that violates policy, but there are many other things that happen behind the scenes that are not only removal of this content, including limiting the reach of the content by taking it out of the engagement algorithm and out of the suggested search. This was a big announcement from Musk when he took over X, what is now known as X, of freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. So social media platforms are constantly deciding what is the content that is eligible for search, what is the content that is eligible for a flag and a remove, or flag and a review before removal. So, in this specific image of the happy merchant, which has been widely abused and spread on social media platforms, especially with today's generative AI technology, there is no reason that the use of content like that shouldn't be flagged automatically for review by the social media platforms. Everything we've seen has suggested that statistically, overwhelmingly, this image is spread not for historical or educational purposes. It is spread in order to spread hate.
Okay, understood. Now, how do you operate in the realm of news? And for example, the Gaza conflict and the images we have, the shocking images we have coming out of that. I mean, do you get involved in flagging those images as well?
That's a fantastic question. So, the way that social media platforms deal with this issue is something called the newsworthy exception, which is that if an account is registered as or registered or presenting as a news or media account, they have the ability to report on things that a regular user would not have the ability to at all. And certainly in the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, there was a lot of key and critical information coming out from Gaza when there were journalists that were barred from entering into that territory. And so, too, on the Israeli side, there was an interest in making sure that people had access to the horrific massacres of October 7th that were committed by Hamas and recorded and spread widely over social media for everyone to see. There is an additional humanitarian crisis here, which is that there are still 48 hostages being held by Hamas. And Hamas, a terror organization, is actually the one who's releasing videos of these poor people who are often they don't know what their physical state is, what their emotional state is, and that is key and crucial information. So in a wartime situation, the application of this content moderation is certainly different. However, you raised a very, very important point, which is do we want to accept this world or the idea that a terrorist group that's creating terror propaganda is allowed to have a platform through news channels, meaning content that they have created solely for the purpose of terrorizing civilian populations. Is that something that we want to see in an unbridled way on these very, very powerful, widespread news audiences? And that's something that we do regularly engage with the social media platforms on, and something that social media platforms, because of the current war against Hamas and Gaza, have thought of a lot during the last 2 years.
Thought of a lot, and what's the conclusion?
I think that it's an ongoing thing. They've changed their policies specifically when it comes to hostage content being shared online a couple of times, but generally speaking, they have been very open with the idea that this is a critical humanitarian situation and that images of what's going on should be shared. But that also leads to cases of misinformation and disinformation. I can give you an example from early on in the war when in Al-Alhi explosion was wrongfully blamed on Israel, and it turned out to be a misfiring of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. There was a very gory video that circulated very quickly showing that people were killed outside of this hospital and claiming that there were over 500 people dead. The BBC ran with that headline. The New York Times ran with that headline. And then it turned out, after investigative tapes were released, that in fact it was a misfiring of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and actually only 50 people were killed. Now, this is an issue with the fog of war and how information is now coming out through what we call citizen journalism on social media. But I do want to point out that when levels of misinformation and disinformation are spread widely by social media effectively lowering the bar for what is considered good journalism, what we have seen at Cyberwell is that causes a very significant increase in digital anti-Semitism as well.
Okay, but surely that's an impossible problem because disinformation or wrong stories are only debunked afterwards. So if you intervene at the time that they're being distributed, you don't actually know if the story is true or not.
I think that the question we should be asking is if our expectations for the news media accounts that are supposed to be at a higher level of journalistic ethics and trust should be allowed to use their social media platform like a teenager. Let me give you an example. When Israel released a image of an incarcerated child that was killed by Hamas inside of their home by being put in an oven, then Al Jazeera, an Arabic news channel on X, said that the image was AI generated. Now, that's hardly responsible use of their social media platform as the trusted media source that they are. So I think that we are living in a time, in addition to being challenged by the use of AI and even by the boogeyman that AI creates, right? Is this real what I'm seeing? Is it not real what I'm seeing? We are also challenged to think about what are the journalistic standards and practices that we expect from our media channels when they are using social media.
Okay, now we've entered a whole different debate here because you're talking about trusted media sources. Some people, including famous politicians from your country, would say that the mainstream media can't be trusted either. So there is a big question as to what constitutes a trusted media source. And it's also the case in the current Gaza conflict that it's very difficult. There are lots of journalists have died, and it's very difficult to report from these areas. Therefore, citizen journalists maybe are the only people producing any content in some cases. So, I mean, is this not a totally different debate? And can you intervene at all when this content is being posted online?
Can you intervene at all when gory
When it's
content
being
is being
when it,
posted
at the
online?
moment, I mean, if there is a citizen journalist in Gaza, and there are no other journalists reporting on some event, and who knows which side is on, if any side, are you saying there are sometimes grounds to remove or turn down the reach of this content as it's being put online and distributed?
Certainly the position of the social media platforms has been, and this is their policy and this is their practice, is that in an unfolding war situation, it is extremely important from the humanitarian perspective and from the information perspective to allow the content on there. My position is not about the citizen journalists of people who are living in an active war zone. My position is the expectations. I think you're raising a very fair question. What are the expectations of us as a society? Should our media organizations or should journalistic standards be applied for the way that these media outlets operate their social media platforms? And it's an open question, but it's really not what Cyberwall is an expert at. What we really focus on is the spread of online anti-Semitism. What we focus on is helping these social media platforms enforce their digital policies against anti-Semitic trends as they unfold. And I do really want to say that the anti-Semitic trends and the use of AI in order to generate anti-Semitic trends that are meant to avoid detection, it's almost a new and niche issue. To be really frank with you, if the social media platforms were effectively enforcing their digital policies against 80% of the open, violent, hostile Jew hatred that there is online, we'd be living in a world with less anti-Semitism. I can tell you that from our research since October 7th, the level of open hostility against Jewish people in the violent sense of the world has surpassed double digits for the first time in a long time, has become more overtly hostile and more overtly pro-violent than before. It's something that we had not seen prior to October 7th. It is very much the result of recorded and repeated exposure to physical harm against Jewish people. We saw that also in response to the killing of Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram, two Israeli diplomats outside of Washington, D.C., and the celebration of that attack and calling for additional violence. We saw that after the torching of the Boulder Run for Their Lives demonstration in Colorado as well. We even saw it after the pogrom in Amsterdam against the Israeli soccer fans. The response online and the climate online against Jewish people currently is full stop, very hostile, very violent, and very overt. The use
Okay,
of AI in that context has just exacerbated that situation even further.
understood. Talk a bit about the 3,000 years ago trend, please.
The 3,000 years ago trend is the abuse of the Google VO AI app or AI application to create a trend saying essentially poking fun or delegitimizing the connection of Jews to the Israeli homeland by having caricatures of Orthodox Jews come up in different absurd situations and saying, this was promised to me 3,000 years ago. They do this by putting an Orthodox Jew, for example, in a situation that they're coming to your house when you're having a barbecue, taking a steak off of your grill and saying, this was promised to me 3,000 years ago, or walking up to a woman in the park and taking her child and saying, this was promised to me 3,000 years ago. And the additional symbols and the making fun of Jewish culture that are actually connected to this trend really are meant to reinforce stereotypes and anti-Semitism against Jewish people at large.
Okay, okay. And final question. You mentioned the EU Digital Services Act. Obviously, on the policing of the online sphere is different depending on where you go in the world. We've been following the DSA a lot here in Brussels. Does this make a difference to the way you interact with social media?
Does the DSA make a difference to the way that we
Does
interact
it
with social
make it
media?
easier, for example, for you to get content flagged or removed since the DSA has entered into force? Does that make it easier? Does it make it
I think I think it's a great question. I think that there's more appetite and interest for the social media platforms to be compliant since the DSA has rolled out, but the DSA is really a follow up to something called GDPR. What we see with EU law is that it can be robust, it can be brilliant, but if it's not enforced, then it becomes a question on how effective it actually is. And typically, what happens with the social media platforms is that they invest in a lawsuit to tie it up inside of the court. So I've seen generally more interest in social media platforms to be more compliant since there was an explosion of online anti Semitism following the October 7th attacks online. I mean, it really is a new day. If you think about the way that the climate is today, I think that the DSA definitely increases the incentive for the social media platforms to be compliant with EU law. But we've also seen on the world stage some moves by, for example, the United States to undermine how that law can be enforced at scale against the platforms.
Okay, and you obviously the 3,000 years ago meme or trend is the latest one, but there will be more, no doubt. This will be in the future. The AI or other tools will be used to invent new content. I mean, to a certain extent, you're using a broom to fight a tide, aren't you? I mean, there's only so much you can do. Are you fighting a losing battle?
It's a great question. As somebody who fights anti-Semitism, I have to remain an eternal optimist always. But we're also not following our own advice. Cyberwell is currently using our high integrity data on identifying online anti-Semitism, specifically that violates digital policy, in order to create our own AI that's meant to detect anti-Semitism at a high accuracy rate in social media spaces and across the digital universe. So just like people who are meant and bent on spreading hate with these tools, I think that organizations like Cyberwell need to utilize this opportunity and utilize the breakthrough in technology in order to use this technology for good. And that's really what we're doing at Cyberwell.
How many people have you got there?
Right now, our team is just above 10 people.
Right, and the funding, where does the funding come from?
Well, we're philanthropically supported, so we're an independent nonprofit. We don't get any government funding. Our donors are from all over the world, from various different political backgrounds, because anti-Semitism is also not a partisan issue, and fighting anti-Semitism is not a partisan issue. So we're fully independent, fully philanthropically supported, with no government funding.
That's it. Many thanks. We've gone slightly over time, but it was a fascinating discussion. I appreciate your time once again.
Thank you. Pleasure to meet you.